What would you do if the person you loved the most turned your life into a living nightmare? Imagine uncovering a betrayal so deep it leaves you questioning everything about yourself. This is my story, one of love, manipulation, heartbreak, and ultimately, redemption. Stay with me until the end to find out how I broke free from the chains of an abusive relationship and rebuilt my life from the ashes. You won't believe how it ends. Love can be a double-edged sword, and when I met Amanda, I was sure I had found the sharpest blade. She walked into my life like a hurricane, vivid, unstoppable, and beautiful. I met her at a charity event, one of those pretentious galas where people sip champagne and pat themselves on the back for writing checks. I wasn't supposed to be there. A friend dragged me along. But when I saw Amanda, everything else faded. She was stunning, with dark hair that fell in soft waves and piercing blue eyes that seemed to read my every thought. Her laugh was intoxicating. When she spoke to me, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. She had this ability to make you feel like the most important person in the room. And for a while, I truly believed I was. We started dating quickly. I was mesmerized by her charm and intelligence. Amanda had an uncanny ability to make you feel like you were the center of the universe, at least when it suited her. Looking back, I realized she moved fast on purpose, creating an intimacy that felt deeper than it was. But at the time, it felt like magic. Within 6 months, I proposed. Everyone told me I was rushing, but I didn't care. I was in love, or at least I thought I was. Amanda had this way of brushing aside doubts, convincing me that our connection was unique, unshakable. She even made me believe that she didn't want a big wedding because she cared more about us than appearances. I didn't see it for what it was, the first step in her strategy of control. The wedding was small, intimate, just a courthouse ceremony with a few close friends and family members. At the time, I convinced myself it was exactly what I wanted. Amanda had a way of framing things that made her choices seem like the only sensible ones. Why spend all that money on a big wedding when we can save it for our future? She said with that sweet, reassuring tone of hers. I nodded along, eager to please, eager to start our life together. But even on that day, there were cracks I didn't want to see. My mother pulled me aside before the ceremony. She looked worried, her usual warmth replaced with something guarded. Are you sure about this, Jonathan? Amanda seems intense. I just want you to be happy. I brushed her off, annoyed that she couldn't see how perfect Amanda was. She makes me happy, Mom. That's all that matters. I should have listened. Amanda's family didn't show up, not because they weren't invited, but because she didn't want them there. They're toxic, she said, waving away my concerns. You don't need to meet them. You have me now. At the time, I thought she was protecting me. Later, I realized it was part of her pattern, isolating me from anyone who could question her control. The first few months of marriage were blissful, or at least they seemed that way. Amanda and I settled into a cozy apartment in the heart of Chicago. She insisted on decorating the place herself, turning it into a minimalist haven. I didn't argue. I wanted her to be happy. She would make dinner, pour me a glass of wine, and talk about our future. It all felt so normal, so perfect. But little things started to change. Amanda's sweetness began to feel conditional. She'd get annoyed at the smallest mistakes. If I forgot to pick up milk, or if I didn't compliment her new dress right away. You're so careless, she'd say, half joking, but there was an edge to her voice. First, I laughed it off. Everyone has bad days, right? I didn't realize I was already making excuses for her. One night, we went out to dinner with my best friend, Mark. Amanda had never liked him. She said he was immature, that he brought out the worst in me. During dinner, Mark made a harmless joke about me being whipped. Amanda's smile froze, her eyes narrowing. On the way home, she unleashed a torrent of anger. Do you think it's funny when your friends disrespect me? Do you even care about how I feel? I apologized, over and over, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, she refused to speak to me. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while I tried to figure out what I'd done to upset her. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was normal. But by morning, she was back to her sweet self, kissing me on the cheek and making pancakes as if nothing had happened. I'm sorry I overreacted, she said with a soft smile. I just love you so much. I don't want anyone coming between us. I believed her. Of course, I believed her. The early signs of trouble were subtle, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in a wall that you don't notice until the structure begins to crumble. At first, Amanda's criticisms were veiled as helpful advice. You're too trusting, Jonathan, she'd say when I shared a story about a coworker I liked. Not everyone deserves your kindness. I took her words to heart, thinking she was looking out for me. I didn't realize she was slowly rewiring how I viewed the world and myself. Over time, her advice became sharper, less constructive. Why do you let people walk all over you? She'd snap when I stayed late at work to help a colleague. Do you ever stand up for yourself? Or are you just a doormat? I started questioning my actions, wondering if I really was weak. She had a way of planting doubt in my mind, and once it took root, it was impossible to shake. One evening, we were getting ready to meet a few of her friends. A rare occurrence, as Amanda kept most of her social life separate from me. I thought it was an opportunity to bond, to see her in her element. But as I came out of the bedroom, dressed in my best shirt and blazer, her expression darkened. You're wearing that? She asked, her tone dripping with disdain. It makes you look cheap. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but her face didn't soften. I ended up changing, even though I liked what I was wearing. At dinner, she seemed perfect, charming, funny, the center of attention. Her friends hung on her every word, and I felt like an accessory, a silent observer in her world. Occasionally, she'd glance at me and give a tight smile, as if to remind me to behave. When I tried to join the conversation, she cut me off mid-sentence. That's not really your area, Jonathan, she said with a laugh. The others joined in, and I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. I told myself I was being oversensitive. Surely, she didn't mean to embarrass me, but this pattern repeated itself. At home, she'd tear me down, pointing out my flaws with clinical precision. In public, she was the doting wife, the picture of perfection. I began to feel like two different people, the one she displayed to the world and the one she disassembled behind closed doors. The nights became the worst. Amanda had always been a light sleeper, but now she used it as a weapon. If I shifted in bed or got up to use the bathroom, she'd sigh dramatically or snap at me. Do you ever think about anyone but yourself? She'd hiss. I started holding my breath, lying as still as possible, terrified of disturbing her. I didn't realize it then, but I was already living under her control, shaping my every move to avoid her anger. One day, I came home late after an exhausting day at work. Amanda was waiting for me in the living room, arms crossed. You couldn't even bother to text me? She said, her voice low but sharp. I tried to explain. There had been a last-minute meeting and my phone had died, but she wouldn't hear it. You're so inconsiderate, Jonathan. Do you even care about this marriage? Her words hit me like a slap, and I found myself apologizing, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I began to realize how much I had changed since meeting Amanda. I used to be confident, easygoing, but now I second-guessed everything. I felt like a shadow of the man I once was. But I loved her, or at least I thought I did. And I was convinced that if I just tried harder, if I just proved myself to her, things would go back to how they were in the beginning. Looking back, I see how wrong I was. But at the time, I was still clinging to hope, even as the cracks in our relationship grew wider. They say love should bring you closer, but with Amanda, the space between us felt like it was growing wider by the day. It was subtle at first, the way she started pulling away. She used to greet me with a kiss when I came home from work, but now she barely looked up from her phone. Our conversations became shorter, more transactional, about groceries, bills, or schedules. The laughter we once shared was replaced with long silences, punctuated by her occasional sighs of irritation. I tried to bridge the gap. I planned a surprise date night, reservations at her favorite restaurant, followed by tickets to a jazz concert she had once mentioned loving. She smiled when I told her, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet of you," she said, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. When the night came, she spent most of dinner scrolling through her phone, only looking up to criticize the food or complain about the service. At the concert, She barely clapped, her body language screaming boredom. I asked if something was wrong, and she just shrugged. I'm tired, Jonathan. Can we just go home? I wanted to blame her stress. She had started a new job around this time, and I told myself that her coldness was just a result of the pressure she was under. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just work. Something had shifted, and I didn't know how to fix it. The insults started creeping in more frequently, hidden under the guise of humor. If I made a mistake, burned dinner, forgot to take out the trash, she'd laugh and say, "What would you do without me?" But there was no warmth in her laughter, only disdain. She began to criticize the way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I walked. "You're so clumsy," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "It's embarrassing." Her mood swings were unpredictable. One moment, she'd be affectionate, cuddling up to me on the couch and telling me how lucky she was to have me. The next, she'd snap over the smallest thing, like me leaving a cupboard door open. "Why can't you just be normal?" she shouted one night, slamming the door to the bedroom. I spent the night on the couch, replaying her words over and over in my head. I started to retreat into myself, walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting her. I avoided bringing up anything that might trigger her temper, which seemed to grow shorter by the day. If something bothered me, I kept it to myself. Felt safer that way. But the more I stayed silent, the more isolated I felt. I had always thought of marriage as a partnership, but this didn't feel like a partnership anymore. It felt like I was carrying the weight of the relationship alone, trying desperately to keep it from collapsing. My friends began to notice the change in me. Mark, my best friend since college, confronted me one afternoon over drinks. "You're not yourself, man," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. She's not good for you. You're like a shell of who you used to be." I laughed it off, insisting that everything was fine, but his words stayed with me. Was he right? Had I lost myself in trying to keep Amanda happy? One night, I finally worked up the courage to talk to Amanda about how I was feeling. I told her I missed the way we used to be, that I felt like we were drifting apart. Her response cut me deeper than I expected. "Maybe you're just too sensitive," she said, her tone icy. "Not everything is about you, Jonathan. Maybe if you tried harder, I wouldn't feel so distant." I went to bed that night feeling more alone than ever, lying next to someone who felt like a stranger. I told myself that this was just a rough patch, that every marriage had its ups and downs. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken between us. And I was starting to wonder if I was the one who had broken it. Things didn't improve after that night. If anything, they got worse. Amanda's mood swings became more erratic, her criticisms sharper. The warmth that had once defined our relationship had completely vanished, replaced by a coldness I couldn't penetrate. I felt like I was living with a stranger who seemed to resent my very existence. One evening, I came home from work later than usual. The office had been chaotic, and I stayed behind to help sort out an issue with a client. I texted Amanda to let her know, but when I walked through the door, her expression told me my message hadn't mattered. She was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, her face a mask of irritation. "Do you even care about this marriage?" she snapped before I could say a word. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't let me finish. Her voice rose, cutting through the air like a blade. "You're so selfish, Jonathan. You don't think about anyone but yourself. I'm sitting here alone, wondering where my husband is, and you can't even bother to come home on time." Her words stung, but I was too tired to argue. I apologized, as I always did, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty wine glass she'd left on the coffee table. I felt numb, like a part of me had been slowly eroding away, piece by piece. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek before I left for work, her smile sweet and disarming. "Have a good day, honey," she said, her voice light and cheerful. It was maddening, the way she could switch between anger and affection so effortlessly. I began to wonder if I was the one going crazy, if maybe I was the problem after all. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Friday night, and Amanda had gone out with some friends. She told me not to wait up, so I settled in on the couch with a beer and a movie, trying to shake off the weight of the week. Around midnight, I heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter. Curious, I glanced at the screen. It was a message from someone named Ryan. "Miss you already. Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. I stared at the words, my mind racing. I wanted to believe it was innocent. A friend, a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew better. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and opened the thread. The messages were undeniable. Flirty, intimate, far beyond the bounds of friendship. My chest tightened as I read them, the reality of the situation crashing down on me like a tidal wave. When Amanda came home an hour later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of me. She walked in, smiling, but her expression changed the moment she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence. I held up the phone. "Who's Ryan?" Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but then she shrugged, her mask slipping back into place. "He's just a friend." "You're overreacting, Jonathan." "A friend," I said, my voice rising. "Friends don't send messages like this." I read one aloud, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. Her face hardened. "Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, I wouldn't need someone else to talk to," she spat. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs, my world spinning. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the woman I had fallen in love with, but as someone who had been slowly, methodically breaking me down. She walked past me, heading to the bedroom without another word. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall, replaying her words in my mind. Pathetic. The word echoed in my head, burrowing deep into my thoughts. But for the first time, a spark of anger began to flicker inside me. I had spent so long trying to make Amanda happy, trying to be the husband she wanted, that I had completely lost myself. And now I realized it would never be enough. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything finally crashing down on me. This wasn't love. This wasn't a marriage. It was a prison, and Amanda was the warden. For the first time, I began to wonder if I had the strength to escape. The next morning, everything felt different. I was no longer the naive, trusting husband I had been just days ago. The image of Amanda with Ryan burned in my mind. When I confronted her again, she didn't even look guilty. In fact, she laughed, and said, "You should be thankful I'm still with you. Most men would have left by now." Her words stung, but the truth was even harder to accept. I had stayed because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of losing her. But that fear was suffocating me. For the first time, I realized I had been living in a toxic fog for months, if not years. I tried to stay calm, to make her see how much she had hurt me, but she was relentless. "You're so dramatic, Jonathan," she said, rolling her eyes. "Why can't you just get over it?" It wasn't just the affair. It was the constant gaslighting, the manipulation, the emotional cruelty that had been building up. I felt like I was suffocating under her control. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let her continue to destroy me. "I'm done, Amanda," I said quietly, my voice firm. "I can't keep doing this." Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. "You think you can just walk away from me?" she sneered. "You'll never find someone like me. You'll regret this." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maybe I'll regret it, but I'll never forgive myself if I stay." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, almost as if I were waking up from a nightmare. But Amanda didn't take it well. She stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of shock and fury. Then the storm hit. "You're nothing without me," she screamed, her voice trembling with rage. "You'll never make it on your own. No one will ever love you like I do." But her words didn't hold the same power they once did. I had heard them too many times to believe them anymore. "I don't need you," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "I need to find myself again. I can't keep living like this." Amanda's eyes burned with venom. She threw something at me, a glass, maybe a vase, and stormed off into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, frozen for a moment, the realization sinking in. It was over. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. The next few days were hell. Amanda went into full damage control mode, calling me incessantly, begging me to come back, sending me long, pleading messages. "I'm sorry, Jonathan. I can change. Please, just give me another chance." But I knew better. The cycle of manipulation and control would never end. It was time to let go, no matter how hard it was. I packed my things, just the essentials, and left. As I walked out the door, Amanda didn't come after me. She didn't even try to stop me. And that, in itself, was the hardest part to accept. The woman I had once loved no longer cared enough to fight for me. Leaving Amanda was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace, trying to make the marriage work, that I had forgotten who I was. But the moment I stepped out of that apartment, it was as if I could finally breathe again. The suffocating weight of her presence, the constant criticism, the emotional manipulation, it was all gone. For the first few days, I barely knew what to do with myself. I had spent so many years living in her shadow, adjusting to her whims, that I had forgotten who I was. I moved into a small apartment, barely furnishing it at first, just a bed, a couch, and a table. I needed space to think, to heal. But the emptiness was overwhelming. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, the echo of her voice still lingering in my mind. "You're nothing without me," she'd said. I tried to shake off the memory, but it clung to me like a shadow. I started seeing a therapist, someone to help me unpack the years of emotional abuse I had endured. At first, I couldn't bring myself to talk about the things Amanda had said or done, but with time, I started to open up. My therapist explained the patterns of abuse, how Amanda had isolated me, controlled me, and chipped away at my self-worth. It was hard to hear, but it was the first step toward healing. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had distanced myself from during the marriage. Mark was the first one to reach out. He could see the change in me. "I'm glad you're finally free, man," he said. "You deserve so much better than that." Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and running. I began to rediscover what it felt like to be me again, without the constant cloud of doubt and criticism hanging over me. I even started dating again, though I was cautious. The scars from my marriage were still fresh, and I wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious. But as the weeks went on, I began to realize that, despite the pain, I had learned something important about myself. I wasn't weak. I wasn't pathetic. I was strong. I had walked away from a toxic relationship, and that took courage. I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. Even though I was starting to feel like myself again, the past had a way of creeping back in. I couldn't entirely escape Amanda, even though I had physically left her behind. There were moments when the loneliness would hit me like a wave. I'd be sitting at a cafe, sipping coffee, and suddenly, I'd feel the familiar ache in my chest. A phantom memory of her voice, her laugh, the way she'd smile when everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and I couldn't keep pretending that it was. It was late one evening when I got the text. "Jonathan, we need to talk. Please. I've changed." The message was from Amanda. I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to believe the things she was saying, even though I knew deep down that nothing had changed. She was manipulative, controlling. Nothing she could say would erase the years of pain she had caused. But then I remembered something my therapist had told me. The past doesn't change, Jonathan. What matters is how you move forward from it. I decided not to respond. Not this time. But that decision wasn't as easy as I thought. The doubts crept in. What if she really had changed? What if I had made a mistake? I couldn't help but question myself, even after everything that had happened. I knew I was better off without her, but the idea of closure haunted me. I wanted to hear her say that she was sorry, that I hadn't been crazy, that I hadn't imagined everything. I wanted to believe that she could be the person she pretended to be at the beginning of our relationship. But I knew the truth. It wasn't me who needed closure. It was her. And I wasn't about to let myself be dragged back into her web. The next few days were hard. I kept my phone on silent, avoiding any further contact with her. I needed space not just from Amanda, but from the person I used to be when I was with her. The man who constantly apologized, who ignored his own needs to try to fix something that was never going to be fixed. That man was gone, and I had to keep him gone. Time began to blur into a strange rhythm of routine and self-discovery. I settled into my new life, even though the echoes of the past occasionally whispered at the edges of my thoughts. But slowly it became easier. The pain from my marriage, though still there, didn't have the same power over me anymore. I had taken the first steps toward healing, and I was proud of that. My work became a refuge, something to focus on when I needed to escape the overwhelming silence of my apartment. I started taking on more responsibilities at the office, pushing myself in ways I hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was achieving something for myself, not for someone else's approval. My colleagues noticed the change in me. "You're looking good, Jonathan," they'd say. "More confident." I started making new memories, too. One Friday evening, Mark invited me to a game night at his place. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for socializing in the way I used to. But something inside me told me to go. I had nothing to lose. The night was filled with laughter, board games, and good food. I even made a few new friends. It was a strange feeling, being around people who didn't know my past, who didn't judge me based on the broken man I had been. It was refreshing, but also a little bittersweet. I realized just how much I had sacrificed, how much of myself I had given away to someone who never truly valued me. But that night, I didn't think about Amanda. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of her presence. I was just Jonathan, the guy who laughed at bad jokes and ate too many snacks. I liked that version of myself. Felt normal. As I continued to heal, I started thinking about the future. It was a future that didn't include Amanda. A future where I could finally be the person I had always wanted to be. I didn't need someone to define me. I could define myself. And so, I made a promise to myself. I would never settle for less than I deserved again. I would never again let anyone make me feel small, insignificant, or unworthy. I had learned the hard way that love shouldn't feel like a battle. It shouldn't leave you questioning your worth. It should build you up, not tear you down. The healing process wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be an overnight transformation. But I was getting there. Little by little, I was becoming whole again. A few months had passed since I left Amanda, and though I had made significant progress in rebuilding my life, there were still moments when the past would rear its ugly head. I'd be walking down the street, and I'd catch a glimpse of a woman with dark hair, and for a split second, my heart would skip a beat, thinking it was her. But I learned to breathe through those moments, to let them pass like waves. The worst thing I could do was let those memories control me again. One afternoon, I was in a local coffee shop, lost in a book and nursing a cup of iced coffee, when I saw her, Amanda. She was sitting at a table by the window, her back to me, laughing at something on her phone. For a moment, I froze. My body went rigid, my heart rate spiking as if I had been transported back to that dark time. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I debated whether or not to leave. What would happen if she saw me? Would she try to talk to me? Would she beg for another chance, like she had done before? I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, but I didn't want to run from the past either. I took a deep breath, made my decision, and walked up to the counter to order another coffee, hoping to stay out of her line of sight. But it was too late. As I turned, I saw her look up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Her face was unreadable, as if she was trying to process seeing me here. Then, her lips curled into a tight smile. "Jonathan," she said coolly, her tone just a little too calm, like she was trying to mask her emotions. "What are you doing here?" I hesitated, my own emotions swirling. "Just grabbing some coffee," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't expect to run into you." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze flickering over me in a way that made me feel both uncomfortable and oddly liberated. I had changed. I had rebuilt myself into someone she didn't recognize. "I see you've moved on," she said, her words laced with something I couldn't quite place. Was it jealousy? Regret? I tried to meet her gaze, not letting her words get to me. "I've moved forward," I corrected her. "I'm doing well." She scoffed, her laugh short and sharp. "Good for you. I hope you're happy," she said, but her eyes betrayed her. There was something behind her words, a bitterness I hadn't seen in her before. I nodded, turning away. "I am. And I hope you find what you're looking for, Amanda. But I'm not the person you want me to be anymore. I'm done with the games." She didn't respond. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked out of the cafe, but I didn't look back. This wasn't a victory, but it felt like one. It felt like I had finally closed the door on that chapter, leaving her and the past behind. After the encounter with Amanda, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a strange sense of finality. Seeing her again, so cold and distant, reminded me of why I had left in the first place. She hadn't changed. She was still the same person who tried to manipulate me, who made me question my worth. But I had changed. I was stronger now, and that was all that mattered. A few weeks passed, and I began to feel like I was truly moving on. My work was thriving, I was exercising regularly, and my social life was blossoming again. I'd even started dating someone casually, a woman named Sarah who was kind, thoughtful, and easy to be around. She wasn't looking for anything serious, and neither was I, but there was something refreshing about her presence. Something simple and real that I had missed in the years I had spent with Amanda. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah invited me to join her and a group of her friends for a day trip to the beach. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of spending the whole day with new people felt daunting, but I pushed through my anxiety. I needed to remind myself that I could have fun again, that I wasn't defined by my past. The day turned out to be one of the best I'd had in a long time. We spent hours by the water, laughing, playing beach volleyball, and enjoying the sun. I felt free, unburdened by the heavy memories that had haunted me for so long. I realized that I was no longer living in the shadow of my former life, no longer trying to make up for the things I had lost. As the day wore on, Sarah and I walked along the shore, the sound of the waves crashing in the background. She was easy to talk to, and as we sat down on the sand, I found myself opening up about my past, about Amanda, the pain, and the journey I had gone through. Sarah listened intently, never judging, just there to listen. "I can't believe you went through all of that," she said softly, her hand gently resting on mine. "But look at you now. You're stronger. You've found your way back." I smiled, feeling something warm and real stir inside me. It was the first time in a long while that I felt truly seen, not as someone's partner, not as a victim of my past, but as myself. I realized that the road ahead wasn't about finding someone to fix me, but about continuing to fix myself. For the first time since leaving Amanda, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't fully healed, I wasn't sure I ever would be, but I was getting there. I was no longer trapped in the cycle of emotional abuse. I had a future now, and it was mine to shape. Despite the peace I had started to find, the scars from my past never fully disappeared. They lingered, hidden beneath the surface, sometimes only surfacing in quiet, vulnerable moments. It wasn't just about Amanda anymore. It was about the version of myself that I had lost during those years. The part of me that had believed in her manipulative love, the part that had compromised so much to keep the peace. I realized that this journey wasn't just about healing from the abuse. I had to learn to forgive myself for letting it go on for so long. One night, a few weeks after the beach trip, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet almost suffocating. Sarah had gone back to her place after a late dinner, and I was left with the thoughts that I had kept at bay for so long. I found myself replaying everything. Amanda's cruel words, the way she would twist situations to make me feel like I was the problem. How I let it all happen. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Why didn't I see it sooner? The guilt crept in. It was irrational, I knew that now. But there were moments when the darkness from those years pulled me back. I had let her tear me down. I had allowed her to define who I was for so long. In a moment of frustration, I grabbed my phone and searched for Amanda's number. It had been months since I last heard from her, and the temptation to reach out, to somehow find closure, was almost overwhelming. I hovered over the contact, my fingers trembling. The urge to send a message, to demand answers, to get her to acknowledge the hurt she caused me was strong. But I stopped myself. Instead, I sent a message to Mark, someone who had been with me through all of this, the one person who understood the pain I was still carrying. "Hey man, I'm struggling tonight. Do you have time to talk?" Mark called me almost immediately. "Talk to me," he said. "What's going on?" I let out a shaky breath. "It's just the old wounds, man. I keep thinking about everything I went through. I feel like I should have known better, like I should have left her sooner." Mark was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "John, you did the best you could. You can't blame yourself for not seeing it back then. It's easy to say now that you should have left, but you were in it. You didn't have the perspective you have now. Don't beat yourself up over it." His words helped more than I expected. I realized that he was right. I had been living in a constant state of emotional turmoil, trapped in a toxic relationship where my perception of reality had been skewed. The guilt I felt was a product of the years Amanda had spent twisting the truth. But it wasn't my fault. I had done the best I could with the information I had at the time. "I'm getting there," I said, the weight in my chest slowly lifting. "I just have to keep reminding myself that I'm healing. It's going to take time." "You're stronger than you think," Mark replied. "And you're not alone." After our conversation, I felt lighter, less burdened by the past. I knew the road to full recovery wasn't straight. There would be days when I felt like I was back at square one. But with each passing day, I was learning to trust myself again, to forgive myself. And more than that, I was finally learning to love myself, something I hadn't done in years. Time continued to heal the wounds, but there were still moments when the past would come crashing back, like waves that couldn't be stopped. The scars were fading, yes, but they weren't gone. I learned to live with them, to accept that they were a part of me now. Each scar told a story. Each moment of pain had shaped who I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. But there was one thing I hadn't done yet, something that I had been avoiding, even though I knew it was necessary. I hadn't fully confronted Amanda since I left her. I had let her message slip by unanswered, let her fade into the background of my life. But now I realized I needed to let go once and for all, to stop letting her haunt my thoughts and my actions. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about closure. For me, I had been sitting at my desk, working late one evening, when I received the message. It was from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized the area code. My mind raced. Could it be her? I opened the message. "Jonathan, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to say something. I've thought about everything. I've made mistakes, and I want to apologize, even though I know it's too late. I was wrong. I treated you badly. I was selfish. I've changed. I'm not asking for anything, just your forgiveness." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to reply. Part of me wanted to hear her say all the things I had waited to hear for so long. The apology, the acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused. I wanted to hear her finally admit that she was wrong. But then another part of me, stronger, more resolute, knew that no apology, no matter how sincere it seemed, could change the past. I wasn't the same person anymore. I had already forgiven myself, and that was the only thing that mattered. I didn't need her apology to heal. I took a deep breath and deleted the message. And with it, I deleted the final connection to that part of my life. I didn't need closure from her. I had found it within myself. The decision wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right one. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't owe her anything anymore. I had to stop living in her shadow and start living for myself. My happiness, my peace, was no longer tied to her actions or her approval. The weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. It was the final step in my journey of healing, and as I sat there, the room felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. I was free. I was whole again, and I could finally look forward to a future where I wasn't defined by the pain of the past. The months that followed my final goodbye to Amanda were filled with new beginnings. I had crossed the last hurdle in my healing journey. No longer did I find myself haunted by old memories or gripped by the remnants of her manipulation. I could finally breathe without the weight of guilt or regret hanging over me. It was as if I had stepped into a new life, one where I had control, where I could chart my own course. Sarah and I grew closer, but I was careful not to rush things. Our relationship felt natural, easy in a way that my previous relationship had never been. I didn't feel pressured to be anything I wasn't. I didn't have to second-guess her intentions. It was a simple, honest connection, and for the first time in a long time I felt valued, not for what I could do for someone, but for who I was. But even as I moved forward, there were days when the past would try to creep in, uninvited. I still had moments where I'd question myself, whether I was really over everything, whether I had really let go of Amanda. It's strange how deeply ingrained trauma can become, how you can be free from someone, yet still carry the invisible scars of their presence in your life. One night, as Sarah and I were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, I found myself thinking back on all of it. The hurt, the anger, the self-doubt. It was all still there, just under the surface. But then I looked at Sarah. I saw the genuine kindness in her eyes, the patience she had shown me, the way she made me feel like I was enough. That's when it hit me. I was no longer the person I was when I was with Amanda. I had spent so much of my life trying to fix something that was never going to work. But now, I was finally allowing myself to experience the kind of love and care that I deserved, not the kind of love that felt like a constant struggle. "I'm glad you're here," I said to Sarah, my voice filled with sincerity. She smiled and leaned into me, her hand resting gently on mine. Me too. I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic moments of closure. The truth was simple. I had moved on. I had found my way back to myself. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I was happy. Genuinely happy. And as I looked toward the future, I knew it was full of possibilities. The mistakes of my past wouldn't define me. They had shaped me, yes, but they no longer had the power to hold me back. It took me a long time to realize that I deserved better. And now, as I stand on the other side of all the pain, I know that I'm worth more than I ever gave myself credit for. We all are. If this story hit home for you, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's so easy to let someone define your worth, but remember, you are enough. You are worthy of love and respect, no matter what you've been through. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever struggled to let go of toxic relationships? What helped you find your way? Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with anyone who might need to hear this message today. And remember, healing is a journey, but you're already on your way. Take care of yourselves.